I think it's a commonly held myth that there's this battle or this warfare between science and Christianity. And it was actually certainly put forward by a couple of books that became very influential in the field a couple of hundred years ago. One of them was literally called On the Warfare Between Science and Christianity, which kind of narrated this story of a continual battle between the advancement of science and the preservation of religion. And what's interesting, I call it a myth because actually, when you start to look into the history of Christianity and the history of the modern study of science, it really doesn't correspond with the reality that we find for a few reasons. Firstly, the modern study of science didn't grow out of an atheistic worldview, it grew out of a Christian worldview. Most of we might call them the fathers of modern science, were people who had a Christian commitment. And it was precisely because of their Christian commitment and a God who created the world with order and design that they were inspired to study science in the first place. So if you go to Cambridge, I was there just not long ago, the Cavendish Laboratory, which is where Watson and Crick discovered the structure of DNA. Above the doorway to that laboratory, you've got some verses from the Bible inscribed into the door. And it says, great are the works of the Lord. They are pondered by those who delight in him. A quotation from the book of Psalms in the Bible. And that shows that actually some of the people who were really at the forefront and the pioneers of science believed that they were actually discovering the works of God. One person said, God has given us two books, his word, the Bible, and his works, nature. And we can study, and we should study them both. And actually, if you look around the world today, yes, there are scientists who are atheists, but there are plenty of scientists who are also Christian believers. And they don't see any contradiction between their scientific study and their Christian commitment. In fact, for many people, they would say that their scientific study increases their sense of wonder at God and his creation. So they work very much in cooperation, in partnership together. The other thing I'd say is that often the reason why people have this view that there's a conflict between science and God is that people have the wrong view of God. People sometimes talk about this idea of a God of the gaps, the idea that God does the things that we don't understand. And of course, if that is where God dwells, in the gaps of our scientific knowledge, then the more we know about science, the less we need God. But of course, actually, the Christian understanding of God is not a God of the gaps. He's the God of the whole show. He's the God who created everything. Finding how things work doesn't remove the need for someone to create it in the first place. I was just using an illustration yesterday in a talk that I was giving about the Dyson Airblade hand dryer. Maybe you've been into a public toilet and you find these hand dryers and you dip your hands in, and they're very effective, aren't they, at cleaning or drying rather your hands very quickly. Now imagine I try and find Mr. Dyson. And so I open up the Airblade and I start looking around for this little man who lives inside the machine. And of course, I'll never find Mr. Dyson inside the machine because he was the creator of the machine. He's outside of and separate to his creation. And if God is the creator, then of course he's outside of and separate to his creation. Stephen Hawking, the great physicist, famously said, God has run out of justifications because our greatest microscopes and telescopes haven't found him. But of course, that's to look for God in his creation, which is like looking for Mr. Dyson in the Airblade. It's looking for God in the wrong places. If God is the God of the whole show, then discovering how things work doesn't remove the need for the creator and the designer in the first place. So I would say that actually they're not in conflict with each other, but they naturally flow together. And a study of science would be a natural outworking of a belief in God as informed by the Bible.